This was me last week. I feel okay. I'm not diving for crisps and chocolate and sausage rolls and cookies, and I'm not overeating. I still don't have the food voice. Appreciate that it's still in my system, but I'm managing, and I feel perfectly fine. I don't feel any different than if I'd used it, in all honesty. I just have a slightly increased appetite before it all went to. If you are returning, welcome back to my channel, and for those of you who are new here, my name's Keely and I am logging my weight loss journey with, without and with Mounjaro again. This should technically be my week 17 weigh-in results, and I would be doing my 18th Mounjaro injection. However, as I spoke about in my last video, which I'll link here, at the time of doing that video a week ago, I hadn't had Mounjaro in a week, and as you can see from the intro, I was beyond cautiously optimistic. I was flying, no concerns. Yes, I had a little bit of Mounjaro left in my system, but I felt that nothing was going to change and I was on my way. However, it has been a different week this week, as I'll get into. So just as a really quick recap for anyone that needs it, or for anybody that's new here, as I said, this will be my 17th week of Mounjaro. If I go back to last week's video, I had lost 3 pounds last week. So in 16 weeks of using Mounjaro, I'd had a 63 pound weight loss, which for me in total meant that I'd had a 109 pound weight loss, and I had an interim target of 13 stone. And last week I weighed 13 stone 1. So I talked about changing that target slightly, adjusting it, because I can see me, I see that I still have fat on my body to lose, and that I would aim to get down to around 12 stone 7, but I wasn't putting a time frame on that, and I would just lose it when I lose it, and the body's going to do what the body's going to do. At the time of recording that video, I acknowledged that I hadn't had Mounjaro in a week, but that it would absolutely still be in my system. It's a drug that builds up, so there would be some, and yes, I'd experienced this slight appetite increase, but the food voice was gone and I was fine. I didn't feel hindered in any way, and that sort of left me in a position where I stopped actively looking to get Mounjaro, and I was thinking, right, I'm just going to see how this goes. However, beginning of this week hit, and it was a very, very, very different story, which I'll go into now. So back in August, Eli Lilly, the manufacturer of Tirzepatide, or the brand name Zepbound, or Mounjaro in the UK, announced to customers that they were going to be increasing their prices so that the UK customers, were more in line with, for example, in America or other places where the cost of Mounjaro is very, very high, runs into the thousands for people, and I believe it runs into the thousands or the late hundreds even for people that are also using their insurance. So there was sort of mass hysteria, as you can imagine, because actually in terms of cost here, I think on average the sort of top dose of 50 milligrams was between, I want to say 250 and let's say 310 pounds. That seems to be the higher end of the cost that I've been able to find. Obviously people may know differently, and that's fine. So people were naturally panicked because there was a discussion that the price range was going to go up by about 170%, meaning that some of the higher doses might run into the £400-500 mark, and people weren't going to be able to afford that. So people were stockpiling pens or just buying their next pen more quickly. And I contemplated what I was going to do, and then I made the decision that actually I was just going to wait this out, and I would order my pen as usual, and then I would see where we were in September in terms of prices. So I left it, and then on the 15th of August, as I would anyway, I ordered my next 7.5 milligram pen. I did that through MedExpress, who I'd bought my previous pen from, and their process is that you purchase the pen, you pay for it outright, and then there's this sort of clinical assessment. So you answer the questions, and then it goes over to their clinical team, who assess your repeat prescription request if you've already ordered, and then they make a decision, and it usually takes 2 to 3 days. Then they say yay or nay and release your prescription, which is then with you. The whole process shouldn't take more than 5 days. So that's what I did. I paid for it, I waited, got to day 3, it was still waiting clinical assessment, and I was seeing a lot online of people ordering their pens after me and getting their pens delivered within that time, or other people saying, actually, this isn't happening and we're worried our prescribers are holding on to pens until the September price increase. So I waited, got to day 5, hadn't heard anything. So I emailed them and I gave them a call. I got through relatively quickly and they just said, we can take up to 10 days to deal with your prescription. It's just awaiting clinical assessment. I was a bit dubious, but I waited, and day 7 came, still nothing. So I sent another email, a little bit pushy, but I just was seeing more and more online about people not getting their pens. And equally at that point, I'd run out of Mounjaro. So I was worried about there being a gap. Then nothing, and I talked about this in my videos, the anxiety around that, and I began looking online for other prescribers because I started to suspect that I probably wasn't going to get my prescription in time. And then what I came across was lots of places saying they were out of stock. So lots of places had 2.5 milligrams and 5 milligrams of Mounjaro, but not the 7.5 milligrams up to 15 milligrams. And then I had the contemplation, should I order a smaller dose? But I didn't want to do that because the reason that I'd gone up to 7.5 milligrams was that I hadn't found the lower doses to be successful for me anymore. So I held off and looked for another prescriber, and I found a few of them, including the one that I'm currently using. So I'll come to how I managed to get it and the relief around that. But they were instantly doing the assessment with me and then only giving me the option to purchase Wegovy. And that was something else that I'd considered. Would I go over to Wegovy if the price of Mounjaro was too high, or if I couldn't source Mounjaro? And I made a decision that I wasn't going to do that because I'd learnt to understand more about Mounjaro, and it'd taken me a long time to build up the courage to actually purchase Mounjaro, which again I talked about in my last video. And so I made the decision I wasn't going to do that. So then I was in this position where I actually couldn't get Mounjaro, and thought, okay, I will just wait for MedExpress to come through. Presumably, hopefully they will. But that didn't happen. And so 15 days after my order, it was still awaiting clinical assessment. And I thought, you know what? One, it's a pretty rubbish way to treat your customers. And more rubbish, not just because they hadn't sent me the medication. And yeah, I understand for me, this isn't a life or death medication. I don't need this medication to keep me alive. But actually, you know, it's just a rubbish way to treat your customers. And there was no communication, and I was obviously seeking it. So I phoned them up, and at that point it said, our phone lines have about an hour delay. So I emailed them, and then I tried them later on, and I got through, and I just said, actually, can you just cancel and refund? And which they did quite quickly. They actually didn't hesitate. They didn't try and talk me out of that. They just cancelled it. And within, I think, about 4 days, I was refunded. However, after my phone call, I put the phone down, and around 20 minutes after, I went online to see if that conversation had been reflected on my online account. And it had been, but equally they had a banner across the top of their website that said, we do not have, or sorry, no, we only have 2.5 milligrams and 5 milligrams of Mounjaro in stock, which meant actually I wasn't going to get my order. This wasn't just around, I wasn't going to get the order in the timeframes that I'd ordered it, and they hadn't been transparent around that. And so that was incredibly frustrating. And in terms of, so MedExpress, I'd used them, well, this would have been my second time. This first 7.5 milligram, they give you a discount. So it was about £150, I think. And then this time it would have been £173, then including postage and packaging. So still probably one of the cheaper ones. I can't actually remember what MedExpress are going to put their prices up to. I know that they've released them. If I remember to, I'll put something in here just showing that. But actually, I wasn't the only one, and I saw and I heard a lot online about people really struggling with MedExpress and other prescribers, whereas other prescribers actually just seem to be managing it quite well. So I'd navigated my first week without Mounjaro quite well. Yes, there was still Mounjaro in my system, but, you know, I had a slight increase in my hunger, but I didn't have a food voice, and I felt very much in control, and I was still making appropriate food choices, and not trying to, I was just making appropriate food choices and was still doing the exercise. So I felt really, really in control. On Sunday, Sunday of last week, I started to feel hungrier, and it got to about 7 o'clock at night, and I felt hungry. And I'd eaten well that day. I hadn't been restrictive in any way, which I haven't really been restrictive on Mounjaro. I'd eaten a good balance of food the same balance of food that I normally would. I drunk about 2.5 litres of water, and I couldn't really understand why suddenly I felt so hungry, and I did feel hungry. However, I put it down to the fact that likely Mounjaro is coming out of my system, and that could be what it is. And I went to bed feeling hungry, but not really thinking too much of it. I woke up on Monday, and the first time since I've been using Mounjaro, I woke up with hunger pains, and that felt like really strange territory, because there have been days where I've barely eaten, and I talked about at the beginning of my journey having days where I didn't eat and nipping that in the bud quite quickly, and I didn't have hunger pains during that time. So I woke up with hunger pains on the Monday, and I thought, okay, this feels a bit worrying. But I went and had breakfast, and I had quite a good breakfast actually. I had oats with Greek yogurt, blueberries, honey, and I put some peanut butter on it, and it's all healthy and it's all doing stuff for you, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's healthy. It feels like a little bit of an indulgence. And usually I wouldn't be able to, I didn't make a huge bowl. I made a normal size portion that I would on Mounjaro. And I felt full initially, and I thought, right, okay, it's fine. Then within an hour, I was having hunger pains again, and that got me worrying. And then the psyche kicked in, because I started thinking, is the food voice coming back? Then I was so focused on, is the food voice coming back, that I wasn't even able to really tell if the food voice had come back, if that makes any sense to anybody. And so then I was just thinking, oh my God, is it out of my system? I don't have any, what's going to happen? And in hindsight, I don't think the food voice did come back at all. And I think I just was increasingly hungry and not managing that very well, because I then got myself into a tailspin about, oh my God, all these healthy, amazing habits that I've formed and I've been making, they're all literally just because of the Mounjaro, and now I'm starving and I'm really, really hungry, and everything has just gone to rubbish, basically. I had continued, to be fair, I had continued to make balanced choices. I had continued with the exercise for that day. I did go to the gym. I was drinking the right amount of water, having the 3 to 5, I think I had about 4 portions of fruit and veg in total, and I'd had really good meals. But the evening happened again, and I found myself gravitating towards chocolate, crisps. I wasn't necessarily craving them, I was just hungry, and I was just eating them, and I'd lost all sense of control. And it was almost like I went, screw it, I haven't got Mounjaro, and this isn't my fault, and I can't control any of this, and I'm therefore just going to eat what I want. And so that happened overnight. Then Tuesday, that was my day again. I continued to make healthy choices. I continued to drink water. I didn't do any exercise. I also was off work, so I didn't have that routine. I was just snacking constantly, and it wasn't necessarily that I was craving bad things. I was just hungry, and I was just eating whatever was available. Well, that also happened to be a good mixture of absolute shite, and that continued to Wednesday. Thursday, I thought, okay, hold on a minute, Keely, because this is ridiculous. And I made myself stand on the scales as I usually would, and at that point the scales had gone up 5 pounds. Now, there is absolutely no way that I wasn't in a calorie deficit, but I equally hadn't eaten, on balance, I hadn't eaten enough calories to gain 5 pounds of fat. That I knew. However, what I've come to understand about the scales, and how I then weighed today would tell you a little bit about that, is that, as I said previously, the scales isn't just about fat. It's not about fat content. There are so many other factors that go into that. So, water retention, how much salt you've eaten, which I'd absolutely eaten a lot of salt, and all of those factors. So I stood on the scales, and initially 5 pounds up, so I was 13.6. I went into I've ruined it. I've completely ruined it. And that old mindset, scarily, and this was probably one of the scarier things, it wasn't just the habits that had fallen back in, it was how quickly that mindset of complete failure had set back in. I'd gained £5. In total, I'd lost 109. I'd gained that £5, and on Thursday, that was it. It was done. I was going to absolutely, I felt, and it wasn't just the mindset of, you've ruined it. I felt fat. I felt like I felt when I was nearly 21 stone. And that's scary. And so I got off the scales, and that was it. It was done. I was absolutely livid. If I had a moment of hating myself, I was saying, you're so weak. You're just like, what have you done? So you haven't had Mounjaro for a week, and look what's happened to you. And all of those really awful, crappy habits that I was quite convinced I'd managed to break felt like they were creeping back in. And so I went downstairs and I was getting on with something. I didn't instantly go and eat. And then probably about 4 hours later, I found myself, I was on Just Eat ordering a Greggs. And I don't know whether it was because when you log into your account, you see all the previous orders you've made and how you've made the CEO of Just Eat quite a lot of money, probably bought him a yacht. But there was a moment and I thought, hold on a minute. This is ridiculous. First of all, you're not hungry. You're really not, that you're not hungry. This isn't about hunger. And actually you are more in control of this than you think you are. You need to sort yourself out. I also came to realise that actually I wasn't ready. I do need the tool of Mounjaro at the moment, and that's given me some food for thought, no pun intended, around the long-term options. You know, will I have a maintenance dose? How will I come off Mounjaro when I reach my target? So they're things that has absolutely made me consider. But I realised that actually I am much more in control of this than I had decided I was. And so I didn't order the Greggs. I went on and actually went back to Voy, who I'd previously done a consultation with, and they'd just not given me the option to buy Mounjaro. They just transferred me to Wegovy. This time, they did allow me to purchase Mounjaro, and so I went through the process, ordered it, paid for it. I think it was £212 with a discount. It is seeming to be one of the more pricier ones, but at that point, it was like, no, you need to do this. That £212 as well, had I continued with the way I was eating, would have been gone by today. Like, I would have blown that £212 on takeaways and food. So I ordered it. It took around 3 days to be approved, and it was delivered. No, it couldn't have taken that because this was Thursday. So all in all, it got delivered yesterday. So it was 2 days for it to be approved and then them to deliver it. And it came yesterday afternoon. And to say that I was elated when I saw that box is an understatement. On Thursday, it had been obviously quite a distressing day. Not distressing feels like an over-exaggeration, but there was a level of distressing to it. I'd gone up £5. I was like, oh my God, you know, all of those things. But then, after the whole Greggs thing and with the reordering of the Mounjaro, I realised that I am far more in control, and I have absolutely made those habits. The only one that can undo those habits that I've made over the last 16 weeks isn't Mounjaro coming out of my system. It's me. The food voice hasn't come back. It didn't come back. The whole 2 weeks I didn't have it. Now, realistically, if I'd have continued, I don't know if it would have come back. But I hadn't learned to deal with the hunger. And so, yes, what I decided to do was be more regimented. I wasn't looking at a calorie deficit, so I didn't track calories. I just made myself have 3 meals, continue with the good balance, what my body needs, and I gave myself some increased snacks. And all of the, I didn't eat after 7 o'clock. I continued that, and I restarted the exercise. So I had a couple of days off. And just to say, normally, I don't actively have to try to get up to between 10 and 12,000 steps a day. Those 2 days, so Tuesday and Wednesday, I don't even think I managed to get to 3,000 steps. And that's how quickly those bad habits can sink in. But that's on me. And so I just made myself be more active. I went to the gym. I just resumed normal practice. And whilst I was hungry, because the food voice didn't come back, and once I realised I was more in control of it and took control of it, I was able to resume as I would normally. Yes, I was hungry, but I was more in control of it. And ultimately, I pulled it back. And going back to the scales thing, I did have a contemplation of, right, I am just going to have a protein shake. I'm going to have one protein shake for the next 2 days and see where that gets me. And that was a fleeting thought. It came in, it went straight back out, and I went, not doing that. And because also the other thing is 2 days of eating how I was eating, even though I was eating good things, the crap and processed food that I ate on top of that and the level of food left me feeling rubbish. And what I don't want to do is feel rubbish. And so as quickly as that thought around restriction came in and depriving myself, it went back out. And I still ate a fair amount of food for Thursday and Friday and Saturday, because I didn't do my jab till the evening. So I still ate a really good amount of food, and I wasn't restrictive. And today, when I stood on the scales, I was back down to 13 stone 1. And that tells you everything you need to know about the numbers on those scales and what it really, really means. And puts it into perspective. I didn't restrict myself. I actually did the opposite, where I'm not going to focus on calories. I'm going to focus on regaining control and giving myself a break, but also regaining control within that. That was where my focus was. And so this week, ultimately, yes, it's been a long week in terms of weighing, and my weight absolutely fluctuated really, really high. It went up, well, I say really high, it went up 5 pounds. It's now back down. So in total, this week has been a maintenance week for me, which am I surprised about it? Yes, I guess I'm surprised by how quickly the scales went up in a way, but that's not unusual for me. And then how quickly they've come down. The bit I suppose that surprises me is that how quickly they've come down when I haven't restricted. Previously, as I've talked about, I've got the scales to come down quickly, but I've been miserable and I've restricted myself, and I didn't do that this time. And that is absolutely, this whole week it's been a roller coaster, and it tells me I'm not done with my Mounjaro journey, and that I'm still always going to need to do work. But I think I knew that this is always going to be, even if I get down to my target weight and I'm there for a year, that's always going to need to be work. I'm going to need to manage that. I think if you become complacent, all bad habits are going to, and clearly this week showed me that will happen. But this week's also showed me that I don't need, I do probably still need Mounjaro, but I also don't need it in terms of I am more in control of these things than I think. And I proved that this week. Equally, there's a question mark over the food voice, which I can't answer because it wasn't there. But so this week's been, in terms of weight loss progress, in terms of fat loss progress, it hasn't really progressed because I went up and I've gone back to where I was. In terms of progress, in terms of mindset and long term, I think this has shown me actually some of these changes I can absolutely sustain without Mounjaro, but I'm not ready yet to finish my journey with Mounjaro. And so when that box came yesterday, it was a huge relief to do the injection. I still feel slightly hungrier today, but as I said previously, it normally takes about a day to kick in. And I'm managing it. I'm not climbing the walls, which I was a little bit at the beginning of this week. So what have I learned? From this week? So what I've learned is that ultimately I'm much more in control than I think I am, and that actually this last 17 weeks of weight loss with Mounjaro and the food voice, what I've learned primarily is that I'm more in control than I think, and I am absolutely capable of making the right choices, even if they're the harder ones, than I ever have been before. What I've also learned is that the key fundamental issue for me is the food voice. I can't evidence this because the food voice didn't come back, but I don't know how capable I would have been of pulling this back if the food voice had returned. What I didn't have on top of the increased hunger was, so clearly the hormones in my body are not working properly, and that's what the Mounjaro does. The Mounjaro kicks in and my body does all the things that those hormones intend for it to do, and that's partly why I respond to it so well, clearly. Had that food voice have come back with that increased hunger, so going, there's a whisper in the fridge, there's crisps in the cupboard, Greg's is on the other end of your phone. Realistically, I don't have the evidence to say how well I would have managed it. And so that's a long-term thing that I need to find a solution to, be it with Mounjaro or not. But I pulled it back, and so I've learned that actually I'm much more in control than I thought I was at the beginning of this week. Don't know if you remember, but and I'll try to remember which video it was and link it here, but in my previous video I went through one of my diaries that I found with Slimming World, and it showed a really clear pattern that I'd sort of verbalised before, which is that I lost a lot of weight really quickly. And I think in that video it showed in the first week I'd lost 15.5 pounds, so over a stone in the first week. And then by week 4 I was maintaining, and then it was dropping off. And I talked about in that video that mindset of losing 4 stone, gaining a pound, it all being undone. And I think I'm always going to battle with that, because this week that instantly happened. That I got hungry, I ate crap, I felt I'd undone everything. And there's no logic to that. You gain 5 pounds, but you've lost 109 pounds. There's no logic to that balance. And I very quickly fell back into that this week. And I very quickly fell back into blame and self-loathing. And that absolutely impacted how I viewed myself and how I went about my day and how I functioned in my day. And I felt ashamed. You've gained weight. Imagine what people would think of you if they knew how weak you were. And I'm shocked by how quickly that fell back in, and I'm disappointed by how quickly I fell back into that. But I'm not prepared to do that to myself again. I like liking myself. I like feeling proud of my accomplishments. I think if you like yourself and you feel proud of yourself, there's very little that anybody else can really do to derail that. And I think if any, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but actually if you've got no self-esteem and you hate yourself, it's really easy to project that outside, and then any projection of that you get back becomes a core belief. Well, I feel fat and ugly, and that person said that I was fat and ugly, so therefore that absolutely must be true. And you carry that, and then that monopolises. It's like a domino effect, isn't it, of how you conduct yourself and how life goes for you. And I'm not prepared to do that to myself again. And I don't feel that I have to do that to myself again. Yes, I need to learn yes, this week's been about learning, and there are various elements of this journey I'm not far enough with. But there are elements of this journey I am, and what I would say is I like myself for that, and I'm proud of myself for that this week. And that feels like a bit of a cheesy thing to say, and it doesn't feel comfortable. And I absolutely, by the way, contemplated not recording this week because I felt like a failure, and I felt like I was failing everybody that's watched what has been a really successful journey for me. But in hindsight, I think people want truth and honesty, and as much as people want to watch a journey that's inspiring and gives everybody hope, as I have done, that was a big factor in my journey, watching people be successful on theirs. I don't think successes are always about, I know successes aren't always about the weight loss that you lose, the fat that you lose that week. It's around the changes to your mindset and the changes to how you deal with obstacles. And the reality is I could have not recorded this video, and I could have said I didn't have Mounjaro, so I didn't weigh myself, and now I've got Mounjaro again. But I think people want honesty, and I think the reality is people want a long-term, lifelong solution, and I appreciate watching people be honest and raw about when it's not gone well for them. But I don't feel like it hasn't gone well for me. I just feel like I've had obstacles, and actually I've overcome them, and I hope that people resonate with that, and I hope that this is helpful for people, because actually I felt like this initially that I'd failed, but I haven't failed. I've had a difficult week, and I've used those tools that I've learned to overcome that difficult week. And so it would have been easy not to record, as I said, but I'm glad that I have, and I hope it's helpful to people, and it's definitely helpful to me. And so for that, I want to say thank you, because actually as much as I don't have an immediate community in my house or, outside of my front door of people doing this is a community, and I gain a huge amount from that. And this was also one of the motivating factors when I thought about would I record this week. Actually, yeah, record, be honest, like this is the journey for you, and it's probably going to be really helpful to someone else, and probably other people have had a very similar experience, and it will be helpful somewhere down the line, not just to you, but to other people. So I do hope that this is, and that is the case. So on that front, as a really quick recap, I've not lost anything, or I have actually. I've maintained this week, but my weight went up by £5 and it's come back down by the same £5. So my weight this week remains 13 stone 1 pound. So in total, I have lost £63 in 17 weeks on Mounjaro. I've had 2 weeks where I haven't had Mounjaro. I've now taken Mounjaro on Saturday evening, and I will probably take it on Thursday. So it will be a 5-day week with it this week. It is what it is. I think it's ultimately been a good week for me in terms of sustainability. So I just want to thank everybody if you're still watching, and just thank everybody in general for subscribing and liking and sharing and commenting. As I said, it's around community for me, and I feel like in the comments it's a really good way to gain that community. So if you haven't, please do like and subscribe to the channel, and I'm aiming to sort of upload 2 to 3 times a week. I will try and do that. Currently Monday and Wednesday. I might add an additional one if people have got things they want me to talk about. Let me know. Equally, if this has been helpful to anybody, or anybody who's got any advice or questions, or would like me to expand on any of this, because this really is just meant to be a brief, and they never are brief. I say it's going to be brief and then they end up being ridiculously long. So if anyone has made it to this point, well done. And if there is anything you want me to focus on more that I covered in this video, please do let me know, and I will see you in the next one.